Welcome to AFSA's Industry Icon Series. Today we're joined by Lisa Verdun, Vice President of Data Product at Point Predictive. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a little bit about how you ended up in the consumer credit industry.
Sure. I grew up in southern Michigan, so I was surrounded by the auto industry. So somehow I was bound to work for one of the big three. And when I finished undergrad, I actually went to work for Ford Credit. So that was my first foray into consumer credit. I was working in customer service, collections, ended up in skip tracing. Later on, I went to graduate school and was teaching for a while, and then decided to go back to the real world and found myself at Toyota Financial, which allowed me great opportunities. I worked in global risk and business intelligence at that level. And then I actually moved to a subprime auto lender from there. And that's where I actually became introduced to Point Predictive and the great AI and I fraud detection products that they provide. And when I decided to make a move from my last employer, I reached out and said, "Hey, I want to be part of this team because they do just incredible things." So that's the quick answer. Essentially, I've always been in auto finance at some level.
Well, who outside your family do you view as a main influence or mentor in your career? Who do you think of?
I think of my undergraduate advisor, Robert Gartner, and not because he was like the easiest professor, he was actually probably one of the hardest. And that was one of the best influences in my life is somebody telling me, you can do better than that. And that's always been, somebody challenging you is always a good thing. And that sort of carries over to working in data and working in fraud, that there's always somebody out there, there's always a new challenge to face, and that's has been very, very rewarding for my career.
Um, so what specifically is the best career advice you've ever received?
Oh gosh. You know, there's a lot of advice out there, but I think for me, someone once said that if you're not making mistakes, that you are not trying hard enough. And I think there are some companies where that's really not the point of view, and that is someplace that I wouldn't do well. But especially in sort of the startup area and fraud, there's always things changing, so you have to take chances and you have to make mistakes, and you learn from those a whole lot more than you do your successes.
That is so true. What advice would you give your 22-year-old self? Would it be that to make mistakes, or what would it be?
Um, I think there's two parts. I think one would be, if you're thinking about grad school, go directly to grad school. It's so much harder after you've been out working for a while. So that would be one part. I think the other part, especially being a woman in a mostly male dominated fields, all of my career, is to sort of tell yourself that it's not personal. Most of the time, when somebody's having a bad day or yelling about something, you got a nasty email, whatever it is, it's really not about you. It's not personal. Just sort of figure out what's the actual problem and move on from there.
That is advice that is similar to the advice I would give myself. I really believe that it's so hard not to take things personally when you're really young, and it's so easy not to take things personally when you're just a couple years older.
Right.
Looking into your crystal ball, how do you see the consumer credit industry changing in the next 5 to 10 years? Well, we won't hold you to it, but what do you expect?
It's what we see with consumer finance all over the place is that it's becoming more streamlined, more online, more automatic, and a smoother process, which is a really great thing for most people. Most of us are not out there trying to commit fraud or do anything that is nefarious. But for those people that are out there, that are trying to take advantage of the system, the more impersonal it gets, the easier it is for people to commit fraud. The more likely they are to commit fraud because it's a little fib, it's a little lie, and they're not face to face with somebody. So I think we're always going to see more and more fraud with this more and more online and more digital experience. which really makes where I'm working with Point Predictive and other companies similar to us, where we're trying to prevent that at the time of application. Very important, because even if you're one of the good guys, it's more expensive for you if there's more fraud, there's more losses. So we're protecting everybody in that point of view. And go ahead.
I was going to ask you, what's an example of recent nefarious fraud that you've seen? Is there anything you've seen recently that surprised you, or that was just new?
Just new. Well, yeah, there's actually some reoccurrence of things that are really old that have come out of sort of the COVID area with check washing. Like that was something that sort of disappeared for a while because nobody was really using checks, and with COVID, people started mailing checks again, right?
Hmm.
For some reason, or they're sitting in your mailbox, and none of us really check our mailbox anymore, and so they're getting stolen out of mailboxes a lot and then washed. So check washing has sort of reemerged as a big fraud. I think probably the more nefarious and just blatant fraud that we see is with online social media folks offering to falsify pay stubs and
Hmm.
falsify employment, and you can find them everywhere on social media. Somebody that's willing to do that for you, and some of them do a really, really good job. uh, and we keep track of them. Actually, we keep that in our proprietary database when we have a phone number or a name that we know as a false employer, so that we can flag those when we see them.
I'm so glad you're on our side. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for listening to AFSA's Industry Icon series. We appreciate you being here. Subscribe to AFSA's Extra Credit podcast wherever you get your podcasts.